to the Business Intercept, America, and woo, a lot is going on. I'm gonna jump right into it. This is the Business Intercept, and again, I am Kiara Ashanti, your host. If you like what you hear, find it interesting, find it somewhat entertaining, please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when new videos come out. Now that we got all the preamble out of the way, let's really jump into what has turned into, in the last 48 hours, a mad scramble from a business point of view, from a social point of view, and from a political point of view. They've all met together a lot quicker than someone might have expected, a week or so ago. So last night I was recording a segment for the channel, basically titled "The Corporate Purge," and it was basically talking about how businesses and corporations, both on the business side and toward their employees, are reacting to the events of this past week at the Capitol, with firing of employees, banning of businesses, and things of that nature. Okay. Now, at the time, the scuttlebutt, of course, was that Donald Trump had been banned indefinitely with Facebook, and 12 hours or so with Twitter. While I was recording, that turned into a permanent ban on Twitter. You can't find any of Donald Trump's probably hundreds of thousands of tweets after 4 years on the site any longer. It's not only blocked for him, it's blocked for any of us. We can't find out any of the other ones. It did not stop there. Dan Bongino, who is a contributor of Fox News, of course, tweeted out about the video that Donald Trump gave in the wake of the riots, which seemed like an inappropriate statement to him. And when you say, go home and be at peace, that doesn't sound like you're, inciting violence. But putting that aside, he sent that out. And as a result, he too was banned from Twitter. Rudy Giuliani and the crazy lawyer lady, and I have to call her that because the stuff that she was spouting a few weeks ago was just insane. Nonetheless, she's gone. And on down the line, there are a lot of people who are big names to anybody that pays attention to politics that have had their accounts closed, blocked, or otherwise suspended by Twitter. So it extends beyond Trump. Pretty much, if you ever said, I like Donald Trump, Twitter is ready to get you out of there. Okay. There is a woman, and I forget her name, and I apologize. She's a doctor, used to be a liberal, came out as a Trump supporter after attending some Trump rallies about a month or so ago, and she has been banned from Twitter, and her Facebook page has been banned. The Walk Away campaign, which I'm not exactly sure how that has anything to do specifically with what happened at the Capitol, those pages have been blocked and gotten rid of on Facebook and on Twitter. If that wasn't enough, Google has said that they are now, as of right now, and I think that's probably going to end up going to change unless they're completely idiots over there, but they're not going to allow Parlor, which is the most popular alternative to Twitter, to be on their app store. So essentially what this means is, just like with Twitter and Facebook, you can download the app onto your phone so that you can post directly to the website. So in America, there's essentially two places where you can get your apps: Google App Store and the App Store for Apple. If there are other ways to download an app, I've never heard of them, which kind of points the situation to one of the things we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Google has said that they are no longer going to allow Parlor to be on their app store unless Parlor moderates their terms of service in a way that Google finds acceptable. I want to say that again, because I want you to hear and understand what it is that I'm saying and what it is that Google is trying to do. They are going to ban the ability of another company to do business through an app store that's supposed to be open unless that other business, of which they have no affiliation with, no investment in, no say in, unless that business moderates their terms of service in a way that Google finds acceptable. And as of right now, Apple is being pressured to do the same thing. Amazon, which apparently has a smaller app download store, has employees that are setting up, Twitter posts and I guess internal emails to get Amazon to do the same thing to Parlor. Now understand something. All Parlor is an alternative to Twitter in which they say, we're not going to ban free speech. If a liberal wants to get on Parlor and say outrageous things or say things that offends conservatives, like they wanted to get on there and say all Christians are idiots who just believe in myths, they could do that. Because they're not trying to constrain speech. Parler's essential mode of operation is this. If you're not, threatening somebody with violence, if you're not threatening to commit violence en masse, so you can't go on a Parler and say, I'm going to come shoot you. You can't get on a Parler and say, I hope you commit suicide. I assume that you can't go on Parler and say the N-word. I don't know, but I doubt it. Okay? And you can't put what is true hate speech. In their mind, hate speech would be anything that meets the legal definition. So the legal definition of saying something like a certain ethnic group that was seriously harmed in Germany should burn in modern day. If you went on there and said something like that, Parler would not allow that. Okay? And I had to state it in that way because even though I'm speaking of this in a journalistic way, YouTube, which is owned by Google, they're schizophrenic and don't understand common sense a lot of times. All right. Now, you saw the title for this particular video. Social media is shooting themselves in the foot. And this is what we're going to get into in this video, because there are a couple of things that are bubbling in the public that most people who pay attention to politics understand, like Section 230. But I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. But there are also some pretty standard beliefs that have been spoken for a long time that aren't really actually accurate. So let's start at what and why these companies are doing this. And there are three separate reasons why Google, Twitter, Facebook, and all these other tech companies in Silicon Valley are acting like the Gestapo or fascists. Okay, and this is why. The first reason is, and perhaps the most important reason, is they don't have any fear. And by that I mean this. The social media companies know that conservatives, as a matter of principle, generally do not want the government to involve itself in business affairs. Republicans don't believe in the federal government telling a company what it must do and not do in terms of its products, internal policies, things like that. I mean, there are certain laws that they have to follow, and again, we're going to get into that in a little bit here, but generally, they don't want the government, they don't want Uncle Sam interfering, okay? And so, as a result of that, the basic line you always hear is, these are private companies, and therefore, they can do what they want. They can ban who they want. They can say what is acceptable and not acceptable if they want, because they're a private entity and not a public entity. So that's reason number one as to why they feel comfortable doing this, and when I say doing this, what I mean is this: the all of these companies have terms of service, things that they say is acceptable and not acceptable on their platform, and we can get into a hours and hours long video and discussion as to what those rules and regulations are and whether or not they make sense or not. But the thing is, whatever those rules are, whatever those terms of service are, at no point in the last 4 years especially, but even before then, have Twitter, Facebook, YouTube applied those rules equally. They hold Republicans and conservatives to a certain standard that they don't hold liberals to. So, for example, now I use this example in my last video, but it's a perfect, I'll give you two examples personally. So on Facebook, because I am conservative and African American, I get into a lot of arguments and a lot of debates with other black people, most of which are Democrats. And their point of view is basically that I'm a traitor, I'm an Uncle Tom, I think I'm white, Oreo, come up with a name. Uncle Tom is usually the same thing, okay? So I got into one argument, and a gentleman said to me, well, you just think you're white, and you're white trash. Now I'm black, so that's two strikes, right? He's attacking me in a very serious way, and he's doing it from a colored point of view. Now I responded to him, well, then we should be friends because you're nothing but black trash. And I was immediately put in the Facebook jail for 30 days. Now, that was the last straw for me with regard to Facebook. At that point, I was just like, F you, I'm just getting off the platform. Because that person wasn't also banned. He didn't get thrown in Facebook jail. What he said was fine. Notice, I use the same language, but in reverse. Because Facebook has determined that you can attack certain people, but you can't attack others, even though the attack is the same. Another example. Somebody can say anything they want about Melania Trump. But if you say those same things about Kamala Harris, so you can call Melania stupid. But if you call Kamala Harris stupid, you will get thrown in Facebook jail. Now, we can have a debate, we can have a discussion about the maturity level of calling public figures, many of whom we don't know personally, stupid, dumb, whatever the case may be. Okay, we can have a discussion about whether or not anybody should be calling another person black trash or white trash or any type of trash, right? We can have a debate about that. But what there shouldn't be a debate about is if you determine that that type of language is improper for your platform, then it must be applied equally to everybody that's on the platform. That means when liberals step over the line, they should be banned, they should be suspended, they should be curtailed in the same way that you're doing to conservatives. And that has not been happening for the last 4 years especially. The second reason they feel like they can get away with this is, frankly, Trump is leaving office. And with Trump leaving office and with the Republicans losing the Senate and being 3 down in the House, they know a couple things. One, that some of the people who want to come after them on the Republican side are now no longer in power and cannot do so in an effective way. The other thing that they're thinking about, of course, is liberals like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they don't like Amazon, they don't like Facebook, they don't like Twitter. They think they're monopolies, they think they have too much money, and they'd be more than happy to break them up, especially Google and Amazon. Okay? So this is also a play, cynical I might add, to placate the Democrats. And they feel like if they go after not only Donald Trump, but anyone affiliated or who even likes Donald Trump in any way, shape, or fashion, in the way that they're doing now, it will get the emotions of liberals and Democrats high enough where they basically don't pay as much attention to their companies as they otherwise might. We're going to talk about in a few minutes whether or not that's actually something that they can count on. Okay. And then, of course, the third reason that they're doing this is there's a certain profit motive that they believe, particularly for YouTube. Okay. YouTube wants to be Netflix. Understand that. YouTube wants to be ABC. They want to be CBS. And by that I mean they are an advertising platform. Okay. And they want to be viewed in a certain manner by advertisers on the platform. And so that's why they've gone out of the way to try and start purging anything that they think is not vanilla enough for all of the top ad agencies to advertise on their platform. Okay. Now, we'll talk a little bit about whether or not that's key or not, but let's get back to the beginning thing of this. Okay. So, let me tell you right now, Republicans and conservatives need to stop saying these companies are private and they can do what they want. No, they actually cannot do what they want. There are a number of things in place to keep them from doing whatever they want. So we're going to go down all of the reasons why this is not true and why these businesses are actually shooting themselves in the foot and are setting themselves up to not only hurt their companies, but to possibly end up getting regulated in some form or fashion, broken up in some form or fashion, but either way, to seriously hurt the stockholders and public holders of their stock seriously in terms of their net worth. So first thing we're going to talk about is Section 230. Now, if you've been paying attention to any politics, you probably have an understanding of what Section 230 is or how in general it might work. But we're going to go through this methodically really quick so that you have an understanding of why this is the most immediate danger and problem that these companies are setting themselves up on. So, Section 230 is a piece of internet legislation in the United States passed into law as part of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. Okay, formerly codified as Section 230 of the Communications Act of 1934, Section 230 generally provides immunity for website publishers from third-party content. At its core, Section 230 provides immunity from liability for providers and users of an interactive computer service who publish information provided by third-party users. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Now, what does that mean in layman terms? Okay, essentially, when I go into YouTube and make a video, if I say something that is disparaging to a celebrity or to a brand, like, for instance, because I'm just going to do this because I think it's true. If I want to say Goosehead Insurance, which fired an employee for attending the Trump rally without knowing whether or not that employee was actually involved in anything violent or actually entered the Capitol, was wrong, and they were un-American in what they did. Now, Goosehead Insurance might take exception to me saying that, okay? But under Section 230, they can't sue YouTube and Google for me saying that. And they can't sue me either, okay? But this is primarily about, the company. The other things that kind of is also under this umbrella of Section 230 is you don't have to pay certain licensing fees or image fees or anything like that under Section 230 because you're not a publisher. Okay? And this is key. As long as Google, Facebook, your website blog, any interactive website content, whether it is a social media platform, a website with comments, a blog with comments, as long as you do not exercise editorial type of restrictions and editorial workflow, if you will, on the comments and the content that a third party, meaning someone else, puts on your platform, you have immunity under Section 230. So Facebook has immunity under this, but the New York Times does not within their newspaper content and within their website content. Now, if someone goes into the comment section of the New York Times and says something, they're not responsible for what's said in the comment section. All right. Now, the key to this, though, is the moment you start editorializing. In other words, the moment you start picking and choosing which type of content can stay and can't stay. If you go in and alter the comments or content in any way, at that time, you're not acting as an open third-party forum. You're not acting like a digital forum, so to speak. And at that moment, you lose Section 230 protection. So, this is something that the New York Post editorial board gets into. And you see this on Fox. New York Post editorial board, why Twitter, ban of real Donald Trump, proves it's not just a platform. And the main thing here is, let's see, I want to get to the part that's the most important here of this. So here, let's see, where is it? Okay, so basically what they're saying is because they banned them, all right, they're acting more than just a platform. They're acting like a publisher, okay? So here's what they're saying. It was a little ridiculous that what finally did Trump in was tweeting that he wouldn't be attending Joe Biden's inauguration, which was the last video that he had tweeted out. Twitter twisted that to mean that he still won't accept the results of the election, which just shows they were looking for an excuse, true, rather than let readers judge that they pulled the plug. This paper has a bit of history with Twitter's bias, meaning the New York Post, as they shut down them over the truth about the Hunter Biden story. That incident proved that they fact-check stories critical of Democrats far more aggressively than they do Republicans, just as they police conservatives far more than liberals. If Twitter was a private publisher, this would be annoying but unavoidable. But it isn't, because in every single hearing that they've had in front of Congress, and under Section 230, Twitter is a platform. It's a public forum, which means they don't have to worry about the same things as a publisher. But when they start doing what they're doing, they're not acting as a publisher anymore. Brett Hume of Fox News gets into this a little bit more definitively and a little bit better. Okay. Twitter's reasons for banning Trump are pure editorial judgments. And this is the tweet that he put out. These social media companies have a legal right to do this, meaning ban whoever they want. But they should not then pose as open platforms entitled to legal protections from the legal risks faced by publishers. The justifications below are pure editorial comments. And basically, they're talking about the statement released by Twitter on Trump's comments. This is so simple, it's ridiculous. If you are an open forum, then basically that means that people can say what they want, and you don't really have any business banning it, blocking it, editing it, or anything of that nature, unless it's something that breaks the law specifically. Okay? If you are a publisher, you can do all those things. You can have that bias. Fortune magazine can do that. The New York Times can do that. The Washington Post can do that. And if they don't, they can be sued. Now, what this means from a practical business point of view is Twitter, Facebook, and what have you are able to save millions of dollars every year by not having extra lawyer on staff, not having extra staff to police their content, because they're considered an open platform. Not only that, they're also able to skip past payments to people. So, like, if the Fortune magazine wants to use my likeness, and it's not take a picture taken at, like, say, a political event or what have you, where I would expect my picture to be taken, and therefore I can't claim any sort of ownership of it, they can't. They have to pay me. If I take pictures on a vacation someplace and want to publish it in Fortune magazine, and they're going to take it, not only do they pay me for the article, but they pay me for the photos as well. They have to. Might not be a lot, but they have to. Facebook does not. Facebook also gets away with not having to pay a lot of fees to music companies and performers, because as an open platform and not a publisher, a lot of the music can end up on their platform without Facebook actually paying for it. This is why very often, unless a company has put the song, for example, into a YouTube video, if you use a copyrighted material, even though Facebook is allowed to allow it on their platform, a lot of times they will still maybe take that video down that you made because of copyright, because they just don't want to get into that whole fight with them. Okay? But they're not required to. Okay? So that's the thing with Section 230. If you believe that you are an open platform, then what just happened with Trump and all the people that work for him and so many people over the time at Twitter that are conservatives is improper, not only because they're not acting like a platform, but also because they're not applying their own rules and regs equally across the board. And this is why this statement right here that Britt Hume made, these companies have a legal right to do, I challenge that. They really don't. And so this is what, let's just jump down into, this is like the third reason I think that they're shooting themselves in the foot, but I'm going to jump into it right now. When I go into a store, they can't treat me differently because I'm black than a white person. If you're a woman looking at this, they can't treat you differently as a woman than a man. You have equal protection under the law. That's not just applied to governments and departments. That's in business as well. Discriminatory laws and what have you. Well, that includes political affiliation. Now, it's not used that often, and it's not been a major situation for us to think about over the years, but now it is. And so what that means is Twitter is legally bound to treat me and a liberal the same way. Facebook is legally bound to treat me and a liberal the same way. So if I post content on Facebook that they think doesn't match their terms and conditions, and they're going to block me, they have to block liberals that do the same thing. The problem is, of course, they haven't been doing that. Certainly, especially when it comes to Twitter. They have not been doing that. It's not been equal. And so that creates a problem legally. They must do that. The other reason they must do that is because, listen, Facebook owns its servers. It owns its software algorithms. Technically, they would say they own the content that you're putting on their page because they're using it to monetize, but they're not giving any of that money to you because, of course, again, they're not a publisher. They're an open platform, okay? But what Twitter does not own, what Facebook does not own, are the interstate communications line. Those are government owned. Those are government licensed, okay? And so really, I mean, no one would ever do this because it would cause such an uproar. But if the government decided that Facebook was not being fair under the equal protection laws or demonstration laws or whatever, they could use the telecommunications laws to just basically shut them down, period. Because they own the lines. And you can't beat that, right? Like, you might own your car, but you don't own the highway. And so if they don't want you on the highway, they can force you off. Now, there would be a big controversy about that, but I'm saying all that to point out that, yes, there are legal remedies that are already in place that make the statement they can do what they want false. And the only reason they've been getting away with it is because Republicans, from a principle point of view, don't want the government to intrude upon private business. The problem that they have is they don't understand that if they get involved, they're not interfering with the business. They're holding the business accountable to laws that are already in place. Okay? Now, the other thing, and the most obvious thing, and this is really where it gets with Google, is that right now, Google is getting ready to fight in court an antitrust lawsuit. Okay? And this relates to not only antitrust, but also the idea of monopoly power. Now, the biggest example, let me start this way. Monopolies are just not something in which there's only one of something. So many years ago, Ma Bell, they were the only telephone company. I mean, there was literally no other telephone company. It was just them, which meant, obviously, they had a true monopoly. And as a result of having a true monopoly, they were able to engage in certain pricing practices that were frankly unfair and sometimes illegal, but they were the only game in town. Now, most people who understand business or who have ever heard of monopolies think of that as the basic definition. But that's not the only thing that a company can get in trouble for with regard to being a monopoly, okay? It's also for the use of monopoly power. So by that, let me give you an example. The biggest example of this historically is Rockefeller and Standard Oil. He was so large, okay? He wasn't the only oil company, but because he was so large, what he was able to do is drive competitors out of business by dropping his prices by 50%, okay? Driving them out of business, of which he came in and bought them up, leaving him the only game in town, okay? So if you use your power to drive prices down, okay, or to block out competitors from getting into the space, you would be considered a monopoly, and that would also begin to encroach upon antitrust laws. Okay, so many regulators, for example, believe that Facebook and Google have done this. So, many years ago, there's a lot of social media platforms now, but there were a lot of social media platforms that were different companies that had a lot of traction. See, the difference between Twitter and Parlor, besides their approach, is that Parlor is relatively new and does not have nearly as many users as Twitter does, obviously. But let's go back a few years. You had Facebook, a lot of people using that. YouTube, a lot of people using that. In fact, at one point, YouTube was the biggest search engine in the world, beyond even Google. All right. Then you had Instagram, right? Then you had, Snapchat as an app. And you had all of these other tech companies. Well, Instagram got bought by Facebook, and Google bought YouTube. Twitter stayed out there in the space, but honestly, Instagram was the best competitor, so to speak, to Twitter. Now Facebook owns it, and Facebook has bought up a whole bunch of other apps that would have been useful social media platforms and gobbled up the competition. People like Elizabeth Warren, well, I was going to say people like Elizabeth Warren don't like that. That's not quite true. If Facebook wasn't making as much money as it was, she really wouldn't care. The fact that they're making so much money is really what bothers her. Nonetheless, that's an argument that she and regulators will use against Google and actually against Amazon as well, but in a different kind of context. Okay? So, here's the other portion of that. If you, because of your business, because of your size, or because of your distribution channels that you own, are also able to block competitors or other businesses, for example, blocking apps from the Google store or from another app store from being able to do business, you are using monopoly power. And this is why the situation with Google blocking Parlor on their app store is right up against that line, okay? Because they're being dictated to by Google. And as I mentioned earlier, there's only generally two major places people go to download their apps. The Apple Store and the Google App Store, mainly because it's those are the stores owned by those phone companies, and those are the two primary phone systems, right? The Android and iPhones. So, by blocking Parlor or any other type of business that comes up from those distribution channels, and as well as if someone else can point to another app that is similar, but that they're not doing, it's right up against that. In fact, it's so up against that, they're not really going to be able to argue that in court, which makes the possibility of Google being regulated or broken up higher this week than it was last week, and it was already pretty high. Okay. The other thing is businesses can't collude. This falls under mostly, I believe, the antitrust portion of laws, and by that they mean, look, if two businesses get together for the sole purpose of blocking out another business or another competitor that's smaller and weaker, that is collusion, that is antitrust, and you can't do that. You will get fined, you will get chastised by the regulators. So, if there are only two app stores in Silicon Valley, and we all know that Silicon Valley is an insular area, the tech world is somewhat insular as it pertains to Silicon Valley and people in that space, meaning they all talk to each other. So the idea that you can make an argument that Google and Mac, or Apple rather, are talking to each other is easy to make. And that they block Parlor, that's a strong argument for antitrust. Strong argument. You got to understand this. If Google was to get broken up, the best thing that Google can hope for is a large fine, because they'll be able to pay that. But if they're breaking up, That means their stock price is going to go down. That means the worth of the company is going to go down. That means everybody who's super rich from Google is going to be a hell of a lot less rich, guaranteed, at least in the immediate short term. Okay, and there are a number of different ways that they could break them up, and I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole video in and of itself. The point I'm trying to make here is that for the last 3 or 4 years, they have been doing things over and over again that makes it more and more likely that they would lose their Section 230 protections. Now, the moves that they've made this week makes it more likely, especially on Google's front, that they are going to get smacked down on the monopoly and antitrust side as well. And you got to ask yourself, for what? Okay, I get it. You don't like Donald Trump. Okay, I get it. You don't like conservatives. Okay, but are you telling me that Google dislikes Trump and his supporters so much that they're willing to lose hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars over it? I mean, make no mistake, that is what's at stake. Now, I'm not saying that something like this is going to happen next week or 2 months, but what I'm saying is slowly but surely, out of hubris, I imagine, because I can't think of any other reason, these eggheads in Silicon Valley have been making and digging their grave day by day, week by week, block by block. It just doesn't make any sense why they would do that. They're setting themselves up to be able to be sued by Parlor, and they're hoping that, number one, that Parlor wouldn't have the financial means to do the actual suing. But believe me, there is a lawyer that's good that will take that on a no cost upfront basis and just take 33% of that large fine and settlement down the road. I mean, they would be more than happy to do that. Or worse, they're going to lose their Section 230 protections. Now, some people make the argument, and it's a valid argument to a point, that if they lose their Section 230 protection, that's not going to make speech on their platforms freer. It's going to make them constrain it even more. And you're right. That's probably what the most immediate situation would be. Because they would be liable now, they would constrain speech more. But number one, if they want to be a publisher, and apparently that's what they want to be, then okay, so be it. But that's also going to hurt their bottom line. Make no mistake, once they become a publisher, the expenses that they have, not only in possible liability, but just in terms of payouts to people who provide content on the website now because they are a quote publisher, is going to be huge. It's going to be huge. And they don't want to pay that money. They just don't. The other thing, of course, is, and this is more pertaining to Twitter, shooting themselves in the foot also talks about users. So I think Donald Trump had like 80 million different subscriptions on his Twitter feed, so to speak. So there was like 80 million people that, were, I forget the term that he used on Twitter right now, but who were essentially tagged to his Twitter feed. Now, not all of those people would go to another platform, but let's say half did. Let's say half of those are hardcore Republicans, Trump lovers, conservatives, and they go to Parlor, or they just shut down their Twitter feeds altogether eventually. What does that do to Twitter? Like, I'm not sure what Twitter's number of users. Let's see, number of users. Twitter. So let's see. Okay. All right. So Twitter says they have 330 million active monthly users, and 145 million daily users on their client. 63% of all Twitter users are worldwide between the ages of 35 and 65. Okay, so they're older. Okay, so imagine, if you will, that of that 145 million daily users, let's just say 20 million of them are no longer there. I mean, that's a significant amount, particularly when the only way you're able to make money on Twitter is through advertisers. And now you don't have as many advertisers. Okay, I mean, what then? Same thing with, Facebook. Now, Facebook is a little bit different. They're in a better position in terms of the number of users they have, the way people are addicted to being on Facebook, and the fact that there aren't any real viable alternatives to Facebook, really. I mean, Parlor is not set up to be an alternative to Facebook. It's really more of an alternative to Twitter. And creating a new, quote, social network that's similar to Facebook but freer has proven very, very difficult because they have such a strong grip on the marketplace, not only in terms of the users themselves and public awareness, but just in terms of the functionality on the platform. They've been able to build their functionality over years because of the huge amount of users that they have. That doesn't mean it can't happen. I mean, Ma Bell was one of the most powerful companies historically in the U.S., and they got broken up. Standard Oil got broken up. So it can happen. I mean, I'm not saying Facebook will end up becoming MySpace, but their hold can get lessened. And the more important thing is, again, on the financial front, losing Section 230, losing an antitrust or monopoly, court case will cost them billions. And for what? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. From a purely business point of view, this is illogical for them to do. Totally. How soon this will all happen, time will tell. I know personally, I do have a Twitter feed myself. I haven't been on Twitter that long. I used to be on Twitter regularly, and then I left the platform. When I first got on Twitter, I had gotten the number of people that were subscribed to my Twitter feed up to, nothing crazy, 3,000 people. I think that's a lot, but that's not, what Candace Owens has or Dave Rubin has or some of these other internet personalities have. But, 3,000 was a heck of a lot, more followers than I have now, which is only 16, because I've only been on there in the last couple of months. And it looks like I'm not going to be on there much longer because I don't want to, what's the word I want to use? Celebrate or help Twitter in their Nazism and their fascism with regard to how they treat people on their website. It's just inappropriate. It's un-American, and it certainly proves something else. And I'll leave it at that for this video. In one of my last tweets, I made mention of a video of a podcast that I saw with Lex Fridman and the anarchist Michael Malice. And Michael Malice was making the argument that no, if you were in Germany, you would not have been the person trying to hide Anne Frank. You would have been the person turning her in. You would have been the person turning a blind eye. You would not be the person that would have been the abolitionist. You would have been the slave owner, or you would have been the person that is, excusing slavery. You would have been the person that would have excused Jim Crow laws. Basically, his whole point was that most people, but particularly on the left, see themselves as the good people, the righteous ones. And in actuality, they're not. And the moves that Twitter, Facebook, Google are showing, and have been showing for years, proves that out. Not only for them individually, but it proves that for leftists to begin with. They are always the ones that become the fascists. They're the ones that become the communists. Because that whole point of view, that whole authoritarian, totalitarian point of view is, I believe you should be doing A, and if you aren't doing A, I'm going to force you to do it. This is an old line that Rush Limbaugh used to say. He used to be like, conservatives will tell you what you should do. Liberals will try to force you to do what they think you should do. And, Google's situation with the App Store is a perfect example of this. The idea that they're going to ban another company unless that company comes up with rules and regs that are acceptable to Google, to me is the height of corporate just arrogance. It just really? But that's okay. We've seen all of these things in history have a cycle. Nothing is new under the sun. We've seen this type of hubris before, and it always ends up biting the company in the financial ass. 100% always. And that's exactly what's going to happen now. So all of the liberals and Democrats, they get to have their fun now, just like we got to have our fun laughing at them when Trump first won in 2016. But make no mistake, at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that end up getting hurt the most. That's going to do it for this particular video. If you want to comment, please post your comments below. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that when new videos come out, you'll be notified.